So in this episode of the Infrequent series we call Fact Fiend Focus, it's basically just stuff we want to talk about but can't find a way to do so in the traditional framework of a regular Fact Fiend video. We're talking about the concept of jokes. And specifically the idea of jokes not being funny because they are offensive. And that is a topic that has been taught to death online. I thought of a way where we can end this discourse once and for all via the use of memes. And before that though, nearby LuLu, what do you consider to be the core of a joke?
I think like the core of a joke is kind of like the swerve, or at least like
yes.
That's the thing, is that you have like a premise and then something happens and that something has to be funny and typically unexpected.
So my understanding of a joke, and if people are wondering what makes you such an expert, I used to write jokes for a living for about a decade. I still do, I'd like to think. I like to think some of the stuff we have in videos is pretty funny and I write everything that appears on the channel. But also I studied the idea of joke smithing. I'm a big fan of that. I love it, it's like joke smithing. It sounds so up your own ass, but it is a thing. And I've read books on joke theory and humour theory. And at its most basic level, a joke, as you mentioned, is a swerve. It is surprise. The essence of a joke is surprise. A setup and then a swerve. And you can see that with the most basic jokes to exist. For example, why did the chicken cross the road?
I don't know, why?
To get to the other side. And that is probably the most basic joke to exist. And you have a setup there, and then the swerve is that you expect me to say something funny, but I don't. So that's a swerve on a swerve already. And that's like one of the most basic jokes people learn. It's probably the first joke a lot of people learn.
Yeah, it's either that one or like what's black and white and red all over.
A newspaper. Or a sunburned penguin. And there's many variations on jokes. And that's one of the things I adore about the essence of humour and jokes, is that once you have a format established, you can endlessly innovate on that format. For example, like the chicken crossing the road format. Why did the dinosaur cross the road?
I don't know, why?
Because chickens weren't invented yet. And that's like a really bad joke, but as simple as that joke is, let's just think about what's required to understand what makes that a joke. First, you need to understand what a joke is, and then you need to know the format of the chicken crossing the road. So we're 2 layers of understanding deep already, and these are still like Christmas cracker jokes that you'd get. And when you start to break humour and jokes down like that, you see that there's a lot of craft that goes into creating a funny joke.
Absolutely.
And do you have any like personal favourite funny jokes before we move on?
I actually have a couple. Would you like to hear 2 short jokes and a long joke?
Yes.
Joke, joke, joke!
That's good. I've got a couple for myself. What's a foghorn's favourite number?
I don't know.
3! We could no doubt sit here all day and just have me telling joke after joke after joke after joke at you, as I've done many times before, because I have hundreds of jokes committed to memory because I like telling jokes. And all of them are variations on that very basic format of setup and then a swerve. And that brings us to the topic of today's video, which is offensive jokes. And there's a lot of discourse online about whether or not it's acceptable or okay to tell offensive jokes. And I'm of the mindset that no topic should be off limits in comedy, but if you choose to make a joke about something that's particularly sensitive or makes fun of a particular group or a minority, that requires a deft hand and a skilled comedian. And I would argue that any comedian that relies on tired offensive stereotypes is not a skilled comedian.
I pretty much agree on that. There's a certain skill to making something funny, and then when someone relies on like a stereotype or like, oh, you can't say that, it's like, that's what 13-year-old boys do. They say like the first few swear words they learn how to do and the few racial slurs they just learned because it got a from other people, and it's, oh, you can't do that, and like, that's just boring. And
this is a very incendiary topic online. There are no doubt people screaming in the comments right now. And as mentioned, I don't think any topic should be off limits in comedy, but if you're gonna make jokes about very sensitive topics, you've got to be a fucking skilled comedian. You've got to be an expert joke smith. And I think very few of those exist in the world today. The example I like to use for that is Frankie Boyle, a comedian who is widely known for telling very offensive jokes. But the minutiae that is often overlooked in regards to Frankie Boyle is that he is a very liberal, left-leaning man. And all of his jokes that are offensive are told from a place of understanding and are used in the way that comedy was historically used, which is to hold a mirror up to society. What I mean by that is like back in the days of kings and queens, the court jester would often be the one who's the only person allowed to tell the king what the fuck was going on, because they did so through the medium of comedy. This is a conversation we've had a lot behind the scenes, and you told me, we'll make a focus about it. It's something you're very passionate about. You've seen how passionate I am when I'm talking about the idea of like joke crafting and humour. And when I watch other comedians and I like just gush about how good certain jokes, I'm like, that's such a fucking good joke. And my favourite joke of all time, written by one Jimmy Carr, a 2-word joke, venison's dear. Done. One of the things I love about comedy is that it's constantly evolving, except when it doesn't. Which brings us to offensive jokes. There are already people screaming in the comments, so I'm not talking to those people. I'm talking to the people who actually sat down for that first few minutes spiel and heard how passionate I am about this subject. And the key reason I don't think offensive jokes works is not because they're offensive, it's because they're not funny. For the reasons just mentioned, that there's no swerve, there's no surprise. And we can use a very minor example right now, because I don't want to tell any that are actually offensive. I'm just going to go on the most tired stereotype in the joking world, I think, which is blonde jokes. And are you familiar with the concept of blonde jokes?
I am familiar with the concept of blonde jokes.
What is the punchline in near enough every single blonde joke ever written?
That the blonde is a stupid girl.
Yes. Or if you're, a native to the UK, you maybe heard Englishman, Irishman and Scotsman jokes, where the punchline is always that the Irishman is stupid. And even discounting the fact that's kind of offensive to Irish people, if you told an Englishman, Irishman and Scotsman joke on stage today, you will be laughed off the stage because there's no fucking way you're trying to tell that old and that bad a joke, because everybody in the audience already knows what the punchline is. And the punchline is that the Irishman is stupid. So the only way to tell a joke like that would be to subvert it in some way and build upon it. And this is where me and you can start to draw on our own experiences. And I'll start a little bit less serious with my own. And my name is Karl Smallwood. Small and then wood. Smallwood. I'm 30 years old and I have never, ever in my entire life heard an original joke about my last name. Every single joke that has ever been made about my last name hinges on the same thing. And that is that Smallwood sounds like small penis. That's it. In fact, the most original joke ever told about my last name is one that I wrote. Would you like to hear it?
Sure.
Spell my name out loud.
Smallwood.
Quite a mouthful, yes? No one expects that from a Smallwood. And that was my bit when I used to do stand-up. I'd ask someone in the audience to spell the name out loud. And then the joke would be, well, I'm quite good at it, because I can handle a mouthful, which is SMALLWOOD. And I had an entire bit around that spiel. And that's just one example there. But LuLu, if you're comfortable doing so, would you like to describe your ethnic background for the audience at home?
I am mixed race. My mother is Japanese and Korean, and my father is Mexican and American.
And I'd like you now to think about all the jokes you've heard invoking stereotypes of those backgrounds. And can you tell me if you've ever heard an original one? Not a funny one, not one that made you laugh, but one that was actually original and did not rely entirely on the same tired stereotypes you've heard 100 times before.
Pretty much never.
And folks at home, I guarantee you the same is true of every edgy or offensive joke you've heard uttered by a comedian or an internet personality or an influencer. By which I mean, we know what the punchline is. And I'd argue if you know what the punchline to a joke is, that's a shit joke, regardless of the subject matter. And as mentioned, I think the essence of comedy is constantly innovating. And if you're still relying on jokes that were on vogue 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, can you really call yourself a comedian? You're not innovating, you're not creating anything new. For me, that makes perfect sense. But whenever I've tried to have this conversation with other people, their eyes kind of glaze over a little bit. So that's why I thought of a way to frame this that makes it digestible for the internet generation. That is memes. And specifically now, I'd like to talk about some old-ass, ancient, creaky memes. And LuLu, how do you feel when you see those old-ass memes from the tone that just says internet history?
Just cringe a little bit, just ooh.
You physically cringe, don't you? I think the same would be true of a lot of people. We did a video where I mentioned memes in it, and I talked about some of my favourite memes, and some of the comments in that video are, these memes are pretty cringe, bro. Because the memes I was referencing were out of date in the 3 weeks it took to get that video out. And I think the same is true of anyone who's internet savvy when they see those really old memes, or when memes are used incorrectly.
I have this particular pet peeve with the whole woman screaming cat at the table meme. I don't know how and I don't know why. That particular meme got popular on Facebook while it was popular everywhere else. Yeah. And I just had nothing for weeks other than my aunties wrongly using it.
And that's why I think the comparison is quite apt, because old ass memes were essentially one layer. They were set up and then swerve. And are there any ancient memes from the early days of the internet that stick out to you? Because I think they serve as a great example of what humour is when it's distilled down. Because like, something like Bad Luck Brian. It's like, it's line, subversion. I think that is the most basic version of what a joke is right there. It's like literally just set up and then swerve. And there's no deviation, there's no subversion, it's that. And that was what memes were for years, I want to say.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite, it's kind of a weird one, was that it was a phrase that was like, it takes like, I don't know, I don't remember the exact number, like 32 muscles in the face to frown, whereas it only takes 4 to lift up a middle finger. That was like a popular thing, and what people would do is they would put that on different fan art of like anime characters who had like a fuck you attitude, like, or like was kind of cool, like Itachi from Naruto, like that kind of thing. And I saw that everywhere.
Yeah.
Just now it's like, ugh.
And if you think about it, early memes were the visual equivalent of knock-knock jokes, where there was a setup and then a swerve. But like, you go to modern memes, and there is like 18 different layers in something. Like, there's a meme that you specifically single out as an example of modern avant-garde art, which is, and would you like to like hand it to me now because you have it saved?
This is the most perfect meme. It belongs in textbooks. It should be studied.
And the meme is quite simply, roses are red, April is grey, but in a few weeks...
Oh, you can't see it on the camera.
It doesn't matter because the meme will be massive in front of me as I say this. Picture of ramen. And that is a reference to, correct me if I'm wrong, Justin Timberlake having the weird ramen hair. And also saying it gonna be May in one of his songs. Well, the number of layers of understanding required to get that meme is so... That is a 1,000-foot deep well that you have to go to the bottom of to find. And you saw that and you got it instantly and you laughed. And if you think about that in terms of a joke, that is just the initial setup and swerve with just like 15 fucking extra steps put in between. But with memes, the speed of that process has been exponentially increased just to how fast internet culture moves. Like we said, the amount of layers of understanding required to get that joke. 'Cause that's what that is. That is a joke. It's a visual joke. And there's so much depth and creativity that went into crafting that joke. And if you compare that to like a Bad Luck Brian meme, it's night and fucking day. And I guarantee you folks at home right now, if you went onto Reddit and posted a meme like that, you get downvoted into oblivion. Not because it's offensive, because it's not funny. You're not trying, you're not innovating. You are not responding to culture as it exists now. You are stuck quite literally in the past. And that's something I think a lot of people on the internet just innately understand and get, even if they can't necessarily explain why. Because there's probably people out there who just see bad memes and can't explain why they don't find them funny, but they just don't.
Yeah.
And they're able to make that connection in their head. But when it comes to the physical act of telling a joke out loud, that relies on like similarly tired, dated humour where the punchline is already a known factor. And there's no surprise there. Suddenly it's a huge argument. I don't get why it is, because the conclusion is the same. It's not funny.
The thing is, people just take it so much more personally for some reason. Like,
I guess so.
They just like align themselves with whoever's telling that joke, or they think like, it is my God-given right to tell racist jokes.
And the thing is, you can tell jokes like that. You've just got to be fucking good at writing and telling jokes. Like, one of the best comedy routines of all time is the Chris Rock skit that I'm not going to name drop because I don't want to get cancelled. But that's one of my favourite comedy skits of all time. It's one of the most famous pieces of comedy ever recorded. It has been directly invoked by Barack Obama during his presidency. And Chris Rock had to stop performing that routine because people are too fucking stupid to understand the context of why it's funny. Like, it is a black man telling a joke from the experience of being a black man to a predominantly black audience that leaked out into the world. And paraphrasing Chris Rock here, white people saw that as an excuse to use the N-word when they really shouldn't have been. And he noticed that and stopped telling that joke.
Yeah, I mean, I think about how, like, just context of who's telling it really, really matters. Like, think about how tired and how boring, like, crazy girlfriend or, like, crazy wife jokes are. Like, in sitcoms now, they don't really do the guy who hates his wife as a trope anymore because
Boomer
people are
comics.
Just so tired of it, right?
It's like, Father, I cannot press the book. I hate my wife.
So that kind of thing, that's tired and boring, but still, like, Iliza Shlesinger makes, like, a whole career talking about, like, her crazy, like, thoughts while dating and stuff like that. Her whole routine on like, what's my middle name? Like picking a fight with a guy, on planning how she's gonna break up with him because he doesn't know her middle name. Sounds crazy, but it works from her because it's fresh, it's different, and it's not...
Yeah, she's taking something that was old, that was tired and cliched and stereotyped, but it's a new spin on it because, and it's a spin on it from the perspective of someone who has like a different perspective on the issue.
It's self-deprecating and it's also like knowing.
Yes, and like, when you talk about, and when you start using terms like that, it kind of goes over people's head, eyes, that's meant to make glaze over. But when you think about it in terms of memes, it starts to make sense. And there's probably people out there right now watching this who've experienced this in regards to memes, of just seeing a meme used poorly or an old meme format that's just not funny anymore because the punchline is a known factor. Mm-hmm. And all I'm asking you to do is just use that same thought process and apply it to jokes. And when you see comedians try to rely on those same tired stereotypes, ask yourself, why are they not innovating? Why are they not getting on the same level as people shitposting on Reddit?